So, Stuart, I mean, it's uncharacteristic in a couple ways, right? This is a really tough campaign. A lot of rough words were exchanged between both men about the other guy. This was very cordial, at least the part we saw of it, the comments that they made. Uncharacteristic, certainly, for Donald Trump to make a deliberate decision to avoid cameras, not seen going in or going out. But I wonder what you make of the dynamic you saw and what you witnessed today in terms of, frankly, just the peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, I'm in the pro-normalization camp. I think as much as we can have a normal transition, as much as we could have a normal presidency, that would be obviously to the country's good. You know, one side is going to be normal. The question is, what will the Donald Trump side be? So in many ways, it's up to them, but you just knew that Joe Biden was going to do this. This is who Joe Biden is. He respects these institutions. He respects what it means to be an incoming president, what it means to be an outgoing president. So I think it was a serious moment that, look, let's see how long it lasts, but it's positive at face value.
Well, let me ask you this then. I mean, he's a different person than he was when he met with Barack Obama right back in 2016. He didn't know anything about being president, for sure, but he didn't know anything about being on the inside of government. He was coming in from a completely different place. It's different, obviously, today. He has 4 years of the presidency under his belt. Does it surprise you at all that he even decided to do it?
Oh, I think that he wants to show, to a certain degree, that he can be a normal president to a certain degree. There's a limit here how much Donald Trump can control what Donald Trump does. And ultimately, it's going to come back to his sort of lifelong pattern of chaos, of just not being the person who's going to fit in. But look, I think right now, this is useful for him. And it's good for the country. But, you know, you're going to see these weird appointments and all of this that is really just going to be a indicator of what the next 4 years are going to be like, and that's not going to be normal.
Yeah, I guess, will it be aspirational? Will it be an indicator? What will actually follow this, Garrett? But look, there is a practical aspect to these kinds of meetings, president to president-elect, conversations that we may learn nothing about until the books are written, and maybe not even then. And also, maybe as or more important in some ways for the other two people in the room, as Gabe pointed out, the current and incoming chiefs of staff. Give us your take on this meeting.
Yeah, Chris, I actually don't think we should be surprised at how long this meeting went or how cordial, at least it appeared to be, because that's what we saw from Donald Trump's last meeting when he was the incoming president-elect with Barack Obama. That meeting was supposed to go 20 or 30 minutes. It ended up going something like 90. Trump had sort of fond things to say about Obama immediately afterwards, and in fact would often reference their conversation as president, saying that it was Obama who told him that North Korea would be among the most pressing issues that he was going to have to deal with as president, the opportunity to pass along that kind of sensitive information. They're talking about a lot more than just the Wi-Fi password in the mansion. I mean, this is an opportunity for people who are going to have to safeguard and do something with the nation's deepest secrets. And especially now where you have the U.S., at least to some degree, involved in two hot wars in other parts of the world, getting Trump, who has foregone the kind of briefings that would be available to him as a candidate and as president-elect up until this point, in part because he didn't want to be accused of leaking anything. He has a lot to get up to speed on, so that meeting is particularly important. And also for his top aide, Susie Wiles, who's been credited with running a very tight ship during his campaign, but who, other than a brief tenure working for Ron DeSantis' administration down in Florida, has been out of the governing part of politics for quite some time. Getting her back up to speed is for the chief-to-chief part of this meeting, I think, is probably equally important as Donald Trump tries to set up his new White House.
So also with me is Douglas Brinkley, a presidential historian, author, and professor at Rice University. It's good to see you, Doug. Look, of course, Garrett just laid out very well what sort of the practical and operational purpose of this meeting can be. But when you look at the picture, the two men shaking hands, smiling at times, that blazing fire between them, and I mentioned this to Stuart, as a show of a constitutional a peaceful transition. Does this photo, does the video speak 1,000 words? And if so, what does it say to the country and the world?
Well, the 2024 was a strange and brutal political year. I mean, Joe Biden not doing his Super Bowl commercial, the moving of the presidential debates to the spring instead of the fall, the deer in the headlights performance by Biden, Harris suddenly becoming the Democratic Party nominee, Trump being shot at Butler. We can go on and on and on. It's been kind of a surreal carnival, and this has a calming effect. It's towards the end of the year. Thanksgiving's coming. Some people feel, thank goodness the election's over, and just seeing the photos of them two together in a genial fashion, assumably talking a lot about public policy and world affairs, it's heartwarming, and it reminds us that we can go on. It's the absolute right thing for both Trump and Biden to be doing right now.
I also wonder, because this is a president who elected a president and frankly, in many ways, elected him because of the fact that he doesn't follow norms. He doesn't speak the way past presidents have spoken. He doesn't treat other people the way past presidents have. And yet here you have, whether you want to call it the most normal, the most constitutional kind of event, does it say that maybe there is still relevance in them?
Well, it's certainly a blink here of civility, which is awful nice. But look, let's not be mistaken in what's happened here. You said, Chris, quite accurately, you will have to wait till the transcripts of their conversation or books come out a long time from now, probably. There might be leaks, but I'm sure each of them are rolling their eyes on certain things the other says. Joe Biden has spent a lifetime fighting on behalf of NATO, he is one of the great Cold Warriors, and he, I am sure, is trying to convince President Trump to stay the course with Zelensky and the Ukraine, to remind Trump not to abandon the Atlantic Alliance. There's probably was talk about climate change and whether it's really smart to pull out of international agreements or not. These kind of issues, and the border. And, you know, look, whoever Trump's picking right now, their big thing is MAGA loyalty. So if you're a Trump person, you're loving Trump's picks. If you're a Biden or Harris person, you're looking at his picks as being rock bottom remainders. Not up to speed on the top gears, not people that should be picked. So there's great divergency going on all around this right now. And the fact that you have Michelle Obama not wanting to meet with Jill Biden, still animosity about the Justice Department raid on Mar-a-Lago, tells you there's a lot of bad blood going on here. But it doesn't behoove Biden to not do this. After all, he may have to pardon his son, Hunter. He would love it if Trump would do it for him, but Trump might say, you know, I'll stay quiet about that. Do what you have to do. They're also going to be the stars of the inaugural, particularly, you know, the Trumps. But Biden will be there. Will others? Will Bill and Hillary Clinton show up for the inaugural? Will Nancy Pelosi be there, or AOC, or Bernie Sanders? Will the inaugural see a boycott of it by a whole group of Democrats, where the party will be split in two of Democrats who go to the inaugural and ones who don't go? Biden's cast his lot here, that he thinks that the best strategy is to show up, be there, grant the transition courtesies to Trump, and go out as a class act, or his administration, not one filled with grievances.
Yeah, and as you say, we'll have to wait for those leaks, and I'm sure if they come, Garrett will have them for us. Feel free to interrupt my show at any point, Garrett, if you get any inside info on those 2 hours the men spent together. But, Stuart, let me ask you about something else, because the president-elect is also had a meeting with House Republicans this morning, and I want to play part of what one Texas Republican had to say about it.
There's no question he's the leader of our party. So now he's got a mission statement, his mission, and his goals and objectives, whatever that is. We need to embrace it. All of it. Every single word. If Donald Trump says jump 3 feet high and scratch your head, we all jump 3 feet high and scratch our heads. That's it.
Stuart, is he right?
Well, I think that was a pretty humiliating bit of tape there for somebody to say you're running for Congress and you're just going to abdicate any decision that you might make. Why do that? I mean, why not just have somebody out there who is just, going to call it in and check a box? It's not what Congress is supposed to be. It's not the role of three independent elements of the government. This just shows the reason people say stuff like this is to curry favor with Donald Trump, because ultimately Donald Trump is an authoritarian. Ultimately, he wants this kind of obsequious deference, this kind of North Korean. This is what someone would have said in North Korea. It's not what should be said as an American. It's not how America was constructed. It's not why America was invented. It's not consistent with the idea of America. But look, he's a guy, an obscure congressman from Texas. He's going to say anything he can to get more favor with Donald Trump.